Resident Evil 6, the game that asks, what if we took Resident Evil, a franchise revolving around the survival horror genre, and removed both the survival and the horror? Released in 2012, this was Capcom's attempt to make everyone happy by stuffing 4 different campaigns, multiple gameplay styles, and a ridiculous amount of explosions into one game. The result? A Frankenstein's monster of choices, part action movie, part horror game, part third-person shooter, but 100% confused about what it actually wants to be. I'm Jim. I've been a gamer since the age of 7, which puts me at 25 years in the world of gaming, and in that time I've seen some of the best and worst games imaginable. Today I ask the question, Resident Evil 6, was it really that bad? Join me in a deep dive to find out, and in the process, I'll show you how after a single playthrough I ended up in the top 15% of Steam players. To understand how we got here, we need to talk about Capcom, a company that has spent decades teetering between genre-defining brilliance and questionable business decisions. This is the same studio that gave us Resident Evil 4, my favourite in the franchise and one of the most influential third-person shooters ever made. But also the same studio that thought Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City was a good idea. Capcom's history is a mix of legendary successes like Street Fighter II, Devil May Cry, the Monster Hunter series, alongside some, let's say, more experimental releases such as Dragon's Dogma, Azura's Wrath, DMC, which was the Devil May Cry reboot that ultimately nothing really happened with, and the Dead Rising series. Not to say any of these were bad by any means by saying they were experimental. Dragon's Dogma, in fact, was one of my favourite games for a while there. Shame about its sequel, though. Anyway, it kind of makes you wonder if their boardroom meetings involve a weekly dart-throwing meeting with their ideas on a wall, and wherever the dart lands, they do just what's written on the paper. I've just realised that this whole video so far sounds like I'm talking crap about Capcom, but I unironically actually love Capcom. By 2012, they were trying to chase Western gaming trends. Bigger set pieces, more action, less slow-paced horror. The problem? They didn't just tweak Resident Evil. They crammed it with Hollywood-style explosions, third-person shooter mechanics that were questionable at best, and enough QTEs or QuickTime events to give your thumbs a workout. And thus, Resident Evil 6 was born. A game that tried to be everything all at once, and in doing so, pleased absolutely no one. Resident Evil 6 had a pretty hard uphill battle in this year, because, to put it into perspective, this was the same year that Far Cry 3 came out, and gave us one of the most iconic villains in gaming history, while letting players cause absolute chaos on a tropical island. Dishonored was busy redefining the stealth genre with supernatural assassinations and actual player freedom. Meanwhile, Resident Evil 6 gave us car chases, motorcycle jumps, and a storyline so convoluted, it could have been written by throwing random words into a blender. Even Telltale's The Walking Dead came out this year, and was proving that games could deliver emotional depth and meaningful choices, while Resident Evil 6 was too busy making you wrestle with a bloated control scheme just to aim your gun properly. And let's not forget Black Ops 2, a game that experimented with branching narratives in a Call of Duty campaign, something Resident Evil 6 could have learned from instead of shoving 4 half-baked campaigns into one game. When you stack Resident Evil 6 against its competition, it becomes clear that other games were refining their genres, while Capcom was speedrunning an identity crisis. So, I suppose we should talk about the gameplay, because if a game is fun to play, you can overlook it a lot, and at the time of release, I did just that. I overlooked a hell of a lot. Resident Evil 6 is an ambitious experiment, I'll give it that, trying to deliver 4 distinct experiences into one package. Leon's campaign leans into the classic horror elements with dark corridors and eerie atmosphere, though it still embraces action-packed set pieces. Chris's campaign shifts towards a more traditional third-person shooter, much like Gears of War, trying to kind of give it a more Call of Duty feel, but bringing squad-based combat and high-intensity firefights. Jake's campaign introduces a mix of hand-to-hand combat and cinematic chase sequences, making it feel closer to Uncharted than Resident Evil. And finally, Ada's campaign, originally only accessible once you had completed all the others, offers a more puzzle-driven, stealthy approach. The variety is impressive, but the result is a game that sometimes struggles to balance these different playstyles. Some sections capture the best of Resident Evil's evolution, while others feel more like an experiment in what the series could be, rather than what it traditionally was. Regardless, and all opening jokes aside, Resident Evil 6 delivers a content-rich experience, offering something for fans of action, horror, and cinematic storytelling, though not always in equal measure. One of the most interesting aspects of Resident Evil 6 is its approach to multiplayer. Unlike previous entries, which focused mainly on single-player or straightforward co-op, and by straightforward co-op I reference Resident Evil 5, where it was a constant two-player campaign, but you played as only those two players throughout the course of it, Resident Evil 6 weaves multiplayer into the core experience. Each campaign is built around two-player co-op, whether online or split screen, meaning you're rarely alone, which is great news if you enjoy tackling hordes of infected with a friend, but maybe not so great if you prefer the tense isolation of a classic survival horror. The game also introduces a unique crossover system where at key moments in the story, two pairs of players can merge into a single 3 or 4 player session. What this provided was an experience in which it let multiple teams work together to take down a boss or survive a chaotic set piece. It's an ambitious idea that adds variety, though the execution isn't always perfect, as these moments are scripted and don't happen dynamically. Beyond the campaigns, Resident Evil 6 includes Mercenary Mode, a returning fan favorite that pits players against waves of enemies in score-based challenges. Easily one of the most satisfying parts of the game for those who enjoy that sort of combat. Then there's Agent Hunt Mode, a clever but underutilized mechanic that lets players invade others' campaigns as an enemy creature, similar to how you can with the Dark Souls invasion system, but it's actually probably more accurate at how you join as an infected in the Left 4 Dead franchise. While it's a fun idea, it often feels more like a novelty than a core feature, and if you're an achievement hunter, probably around a third of the achievements are to do with the multiplayer side of things, so don't be surprised if you need to get friends in on the action just to finish them. But I will admit, a lot of those ones will put you in the top 2% of Steam players if you manage to get them. Now let's talk about the characters, because if there's one thing that Resident Evil 6 does, it gives us a whole bunch of iconic characters doing, well, a lot. For starters, we have Leon, the ever-reliable action hero who used to be a rookie cop, and has somehow survived enough apocalyptic situations to make you wonder how he's not just a walking, talking, trauma-induced panic attack by now. In Resident Evil 6, he's still the stoic, morally upright protagonist we know, but his growth is more about holding on to his humanity as the world crumbles around him. Then there's Chris, the battle-hardened veteran who's seen it all, except apparently how to have a conversation without looking like he's about to snap a neck. His arc in Resident Evil 6 focuses on overcoming personal demons, especially after the events of Resident Evil 5. But it sometimes feels more like an afterthought as the game rushes through his campaign with more action, and then at the end shoehorning a whole heap of character growth and expecting you to just accept it. Realistically, they tried to give him the growth to make him a hero again, and I use hero very loosely, and I gotta be honest that there were so many moments where I just didn't believe it. Jake Waller is an intriguing addition to the cast. He's cocky, reluctant, and offers a more grounded take on the classic action hero archetype. Even though his character development is a bit all over the place, he starts off as a mercenary who only cares about money, but by the end, he's ready to fight for something bigger. Though it's a bit hard to feel the weight of this transformation with everything else going on, they also shoehorned a romance subplot in here which was honestly just crap. And then there's Ada, who has long been a fan favourite of the franchise, but often feels like an afterthought in RE6, with her own arc feeling as though it was put into the larger narrative as an afterthought rather than being fully integrated. In terms of growth, Resident Evil 6 offers a mix of progress and stagnation. Some characters evolve, sure, but it feels like the game is more concerned with moving the overarching story while keeping each character to a strict 5-chapter campaign, which admittedly can feel both too long and too short at times. It's a shame, because with a bit more focus, Resident Evil 6 could have been the game to give these iconic characters a more meaningful, impactful journey. Especially seeing as this is the first time we have had these characters cross over properly in a Resident Evil game. As we open for Resident Evil 6 for the first time, we get a nice horror-style opening that leads into the prologue of the game. It works as kind of a tutorial, if you will, where it touches on probably 75% of the game's mechanics. Originally, I had intended to play this game with my controller, but when using the thumbstick for the first time, realized that for some reason, up was left, right was up, down was right, and left was down. Going to be honest here, this was a bad start, because I honestly don't know how that even happened. Well, for the first time on Griever Gaming, we're going to have a future gym interaction here, where I can now understand and I can now explain what the issue was. I was using a PlayStation DualSense controller, which for some reason Resident Evil 6 picked up as something completely different and decided to map all of the buttons and all of the sticks, absolutely everything that it possibly could, wrong. Now, this is not the only time this has done this, specifically with a Capcom game. For a future video, I was planning on doing DMC, which is the Devil May Cry remake, and exactly the same thing happened. And now there was no point in actually remapping the controls by any stretch of the imagination, due to the fact that some of the buttons for some reason overlap. Have no idea why. It's insane. It really does not recognize a PlayStation controller. So, if you are going to play this game on your PC with a controller, make sure it is Xbox controller. Now, I am going to take you step by step through the prologue, as I feel this is important to a point that I'm going to make later. As we control Leon, we get to our first V action, which is an action that require both characters in attendance in order to complete. Usually you will see this at the end of a location to progress a story. Oh, and get used to these sort of quick-time events too. They are very prominent. Leon carries the injured Helena to the next area, and it takes us through how to use green herbs, a pretty standard mechanic in the Resident Evil series. This time, you combine them into sort of pills that you put into a dispenser to recover one of the 6 squares that you have that represent health. Once done, a single zombie comes out and attacks you, and you have 4 shots, and then it takes you through how QuickTime events will work in combat. Oh, and you show here where it says WASD, and then there's a purple dot that rotates through them. Realistically, you would think that you would need to rotate WASD, right? Pressing them alternately. This is completely false. You can press any of these buttons as quickly as possible, and it will work just fine. We exit this area with Helena, and you get to look over this city and see just how bad things are. And to be honest, as a first sort of environmental overview of the game, it looks great. It shows tension and just how bad the state of the world currently is. You fight a few zombies here and are forced into another QuickTime event for a chase sequence. See those explosions and crazy cars flying around like something out of a Michael Bay film? Yeah, get used to that. Finish this QuickTime event sequence and you're put into another one straight away. This time to make sure the helicopter doesn't crash. I won't lie, the frequency of the QTEs in this game is pretty high, but not as bad as the prologue makes out. Finish here, jump down over a railing, and you get a small cutscene that then breaks away to reveal that it was the cold open for the game. There's an aspect of this prologue that I believe to be apocalyptically enraging, but more on that later when we actually get to it. Controls are relatively simple for this game, with WA, S, and D or left control stick to move, right click or left trigger on a controller to aim your weapon, left click or right trigger to fire. As you are aiming up, you will see this little red dot that will wave around depending on the accuracy of the character. Unfortunately, there's not much you can do to change this. You just are at the beck and call of this red dot, and it does get frustrating at times. You can perform a physical attack that is slightly different depending on which character you are controlling at the time, by using the left click on its own or pulling the right trigger without aiming up a weapon. By using a melee attack this way, it does use a point of stamina, which can be seen here. I personally do not understand why they bothered with a system for stamina in this, as I don't recall a single time that shooting was not a better option. And if you're out of ammunition, you can swap to whatever melee weapon the character has, which is a knife for everyone except Jake, who fights unarmed, and then it doesn't use stamina to use these weapons, which makes zero sense to me, especially in Jake's scenario, because you click with Jake, and he will make a melee using stamina. Swap to his melee weapon, and Jake uses the same melee attack with no stamina. So we come to this opening splash screen, which is quite appealing, at least to me, and we are prompted to choose a campaign. As I did on my original playthrough, and I believe that a lot of people did the same thing here, I chose to start with Leon. The prologue made me start with Leon, so I kind of wanted to continue on. And being my favorite protagonist of the Resident Evil franchise up to that point, the choice kind of made itself. So let's break down the campaigns themselves, starting with Leon. Leon's campaign starts in a classic Resident Evil fashion, with a dramatic moral dilemma. You, as Leon, have to make the difficult choice of whether or not to shoot the President of the United States. You'd think that this would be an incredibly weighty decision, but no, the game makes it for you, because of course it does. The President is already infected, and Leon has no choice but to pull the trigger, as the President attacks Helena. This starts off as a powerful moment. Now, credit where credit is due, the opening of Leon's campaign actually tries to be horror. You're walking through an abandoned university with eerie lighting, unsettling silence. It's got all the right ingredients, but just when you start thinking, oh wow, maybe this is Resident Evil going back to its roots, the game remembers it has an action quota to meet and promptly throws an entire army of zombies at you. And then before you can even process that, it's throwing you into full-on zombie-infested subway chase, because subtlety? That's for other games. This is the core issue with Leon's campaign. It's constantly fighting itself. Half the time, it wants to be the slow, tension-building survival horror game that people loved in Resident Evil 2. The other half, it's just throwing scripted action sequences at you like they're being hurled out of a t-shirt cannon. And the result? A campaign that doesn't feel quite right. There are some incredible moments and incredible storytelling, but it does feel just like you're going point to point to point to point, without much really progressing. The start of the game sees you with Helena, who tells you that, okay, we're going to go and meet at a monastery, and that will give you answers that you seek. You get to that monastery, and it doesn't really answer many questions. Sure, you find out who the kind of big bad is at that point, and what they were kind of doing, but it doesn't answer why, how, motivations, just that this bad guy is the bad guy. The amalgamation of this ends in a fight with a guy that takes literally a chapter and a half to kill, with multiple different forms of which he was taking. You fight alongside Helena, Ada jumps in at one point. It's a mess, which is really a shame, because it started so well, but the ending just felt a bit rushed, at least for me. Now Chris. If Leon's campaign was Resident Evil trying to be horror, then Chris's campaign is Resident Evil realizing it just wants to be a full-on military shooter. And it's not subtle about it by any stretch of the imagination. Chris Redfield, now a grizzled BSAA captain, suffering from PTSD, is leading his squad against waves of Wavo, which are kind of the lackey zombies that you'll find in this game, in a high-stakes war against bioterrorism. Gone are the eerie hallways with limited ammo. Instead, Chris is gunning down mutated soldiers in full-scale firefights with helicopters exploding in the background. It's less survival horror and more Michael Bay presents Resident Evil. And I know that I've used the Michael Bay joke before, and I'm repeating it, but honestly, it's so fitting. Chris's story does try to bring some emotional depth, particularly with the tragic fate of his BSAA squad. But when you're spending most of your time ducking behind cover and mowing down enemies with machine guns, it's hard to feel the same level of tension as previous Resident Evil titles. It's undeniably fun, but whether it feels like Resident Evil is another question entirely. And as I mentioned before, they tried to shoehorn a lot of Chris's character growth into the last chapter, which at that point I feel like it's too late. You get the opening cutscenes with Chris where you can tell that he is jaded, he is older, he is just done. And then he gets pulled into the BSAA again, but all of a sudden he's just a hero again, and there doesn't seem to be any actual repercussions for character growth between points A and B. They're just an immediate change. And then shoehorning the attempted character growth into the last chapter, I didn't care by that point. It just felt like an action sequence that didn't really have much substance in the grand scheme of things. So now Jake's campaign. Oh boy. We have Jake Muller, a brand new character introduced into the franchise with a very familiar family to those coming back from previous games, because he just happens to be Albert Wesker's son. And what does that mean for the gameplay? martial arts combat, high-speed action sequences, and a whole lot of running away from the terrifying Ustanak, a hulking bioweapon that seems to have mistaken Jake for a collectible trophy. I should point out at this stage that realistically, when it came to Jake's campaign, sure, he's Wesker's son, but you never find out anything more than that. You never find out anything deeper. Like, was he a biological son? Was he an experiment? There could have been some really interesting avenues to go down here. All that you find out is that he is immune to the C virus, which is the virus that they're focusing on in this particular game. And that's just it. They need him for his blood to create antibodies, and yeah, that's it. Jake's campaign is probably the most unique of the four, blending elements of classic Resident Evil survival with high-octane set pieces. His dynamic with Sherry Birkin is actually one of the highlights of the game. Two characters with vastly different backgrounds, forced to rely on each other. But just like the rest of Resident Evil 6, the action often drowns out any horror elements, making it feel like a never-ending escape sequence rather than a true Resident Evil experience. This is also where the forced love story comes into it. There are two moments in which you think that the two of them are going to have a love subplot. One, which is a fleeting moment here, and then one at the end. To be completely honest, they could have really played on that, and it would have been far more interesting, but truth be told, it was just there, and it didn't need to be. And now, finally, Ada's campaign. Finally, we have Ada Wong, the enigmatic spy who always seems to be 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Her campaign is arguably the most Resident Evil-like of the four, bringing back elements of puzzle solving, stealth, and solo survival. Unlike the others, Ada isn't mowing down armies of zombies, she's infiltrating secret facilities, unraveling the game's deeper mysteries, and naturally leaving behind cryptic one-liners that don't really explain anything at all. Throughout the course of the game, you start to realize there are two, in fact, Ada Wongs, which didn't make a lot of sense until you get to a point in Leon's campaign where you actually see the birth of the fake Ada Wong. But basically, all in all, throughout the game, you will see Ada in different outfits. If she is in a different outfit, it is a different Ada. There is this design in which she wears her classic red. There is this design where she is wearing a blue dress, wearing a red scarf. The blue one's the fake one. And a lot of Chris's campaign is chasing Ada, the fake one. Which I won't lie, I hope this does come back in a future game, seeing as since Resident Evil 6, we haven't seen Ada in 7 nor in 8, because at one point during the game, Chris announces to Leon, who he knows Leon and Ada are, a will they, won't they scenario. He announces to Leon that Ada is dead, talking about the fake one. And then Leon finds out very soon after that this is not true as he fights alongside the real Ada for the final battle. So as far as their kind of governments are concerned, she's gone. But this could be very interesting in a future game. Okay, so as we tend to do on this channel, we're going to go through the pros and cons of the game. Starting with those wonderful, wonderful pros. Gameplay time. Okay, so let's average out each chapter to about an hour's worth of gameplay, which probably works out about right, as some of them go for about an hour 20, others go for around 45 minutes, but most of them did fall around the hour mark, at least for me. This puts it at around 20 hours of campaign, which isn't a huge story, especially when you compare it to some of the other releases in 2012 like Mass Effect 3 or Assassin's Creed 3. Considering, however, this Resident Evil game was based more in the action genre than anything else, I think that 20 hours is not bad, especially when you compare it to other action titles like, say, Halo 4, which was 7 to 8 hours for the campaign, but a 30-hour completionist run, roughly. I think the general intention here was to have Resident Evil not too long, so that audiences would go back and replay chunks of it for collectibles without it feeling like a drag, which I think balances quite well. It is, however, one of those cases of, if you're ever in a situation where you're like, oh, I'll play one more chapter before going to bed, it should only take me 20 minutes. No, the chapters go for about an hour. You'll be there for the full hour, and you may get frustrated. So keep that in mind if you ever decide to play it. The next pro that I have is the game doesn't look too bad. Now, it does not in any way compare to, say, Final Fantasy XIII, which was released 2 years prior. But having said this, you did have in Final Fantasy XIII the difference between, say, the in-game graphics and the cinematic graphics. Whereas Resident Evil 6 maintained the same kind of graphic level throughout the entirety. Sure, the cinematics were slightly better, but ultimately, they kind of averaged out. But also, Final Fantasy are always known to absolutely push the envelope when it comes to graphics of the time, so we can't really compare it to that. Where Resident Evil 6's graphics do fall apart, though, are, well, some of the transformations. Looking at you, Simmons. Another pro, I would say Leon's campaign. Yeah, look, I can talk a load of crap about the game, but despite one moment in Leon's campaign, which I will touch on in the cons section, realistically, Leon's campaign is good, and it seems that a lot of people agreed with me considering the difference in number of how many people actually completed their campaigns. I will go through the achievements and that side of things in a little while, because I think there's going to be some interesting information for people there. The team at Capcom really felt like they were trying here when it came to keeping Leon's story as Resident Evil as possible. And for the most part, they succeeded, even to the point of this imagery here. Yeah, you don't really get that after Leon's part in the game, so don't get too used to it. As far as pros go, this one is going to be incredibly subjective. They really did get the feel of an action film. If that's what you want from this game, then it hits really well. And then the last thing on this list, the co-op. In theory, the co-op in the game is pretty good. Coming off the back of Resident Evil 5, where the same co-op mechanics were used, it makes it a fair bit of fun to play with a friend and communicate through the campaign. Now, I will touch on a little bit of these co-op things a little bit later. I'll explain why it is such a pro in just a moment. But before we do that, let's talk about the cons. First of all, this game has no idea what it wants to be. It's a Resident Evil game, so playing Leon's campaign will give you that horror feel. Chris's is basically Gears of War, and Jake's is one long chase sequence to get away from the Ustanak that follows you around like an annoying ex-girlfriend. It leans on the dark and gritty sometimes, and big action explosions in the others. The quick-time events. F me. When I played the tutorial on my replay, I thought, wow, that's a lot of QTEs. Surely they're not that frequent. And look, I did mention earlier in the video, yeah, they're not as frequent as they make them out in the prologue, but they are frequent. They do not stop. They are probably the most annoying part of the game for me and destroy the momentum of combat, of any of the scenarios that are supposed to be there to create that heightened stress level. It honestly just screws it up. The way the story is told, now, the campaign and its overarching story, realistically, is fine. It's nothing in comparison to, say, Telltale's The Walking Dead, or even Prototype 2, for that matter, which were also released the same year. But the way the story is told, with parts of the overarching story only coming together when you see bits and pieces of the crossovers, just really sucked for a video game. If this was a movie, yeah, 100% the pacing would have worked, but with the really long periods of combat and fighting in between, mostly you forget the pieces of information you were given previously. Genuinely, most of the time I spent writing this, I had to have campaign synopsis up to remind me of what actually happened, because my memory of it was not great, because I was forgetting key moments of it. Like, genuinely, looking at the synopsis, there are moments here that I don't remember playing through at all. It's almost as if with this particular game, you were supposed to realistically play Chapter 1 Leon, Chapter 1 Chris, Chapter 1 Jake, in order to get the story as it was. If you were to do it in chronological order, you'd probably be doing Chapters 1 and 2 of Chris's first, or something like that. But it feels as though in order to make the story actually flow better, you had to do 1, 1, and 1. And frankly, that doesn't appeal to me. Like, you want to start with a campaign, finish a campaign, and then you get more information in the next one, which, if it was a movie and they'd paced the scenes out the way that they were supposed to be, would have totally worked. But as I said, as part of a game, and having Leon up the top when chronologically his story does not come first, weird choice. The boss fights. Ultimately, in this game, the boss fights are garbage. In a lot of Resident Evil games, there are bosses in which there is a way to kill them that is not just sink them with bullets. In this game, it is just sink them with bullets. There may be a few explosive barrels around for you to make use of, but honestly, that's about it. Otherwise, they will give you a sequence in which, as an example, in the end of Leon's campaign, when fighting one of the many forms of Simmons, when he's turned into a T-Rex zombie, you get on the back of this truck that gives you a machine gun for 1 minute. That's not even an exaggeration. I timed it. It's 58 seconds that you are able to use this, including the cutscenes of it entering and leaving. It is not even a joke. 58 seconds. So realistically, you get 40 seconds of gun time just to break up the monotony, but then you go straight back to it anyway. There was no point in this. But yeah, in any case, it's a case of shoot it until it dies, which is great, but then, like in the case of Chris's last fight, it does not give you any information on how to beat the thing. Bullets will stun it, yeah, but then his partner needs to go up and use his new electric ability that he has learned. I won't give a spoiler as to how or why, but while the creature is down, you need to have that electronic ability attack the monster, otherwise you can't kill it. And fact of the matter is, choosing Chris instead of the partner in that, not a great idea, because the AI is not good. Like, it is not good. If I was playing this with a friend, this genuinely would have been much, much easier. But this particular fight, in order to get through it, I had to go back and put on unlimited ammunition just so I could continue to stun it, in the rare case that the partner would actually use the ability he needed to in order to hurt the thing. Genuinely frustrating, because this fight will literally go on forever otherwise. Reused segments of the game. Okay, so now this point is incredibly annoying to me. I loved the idea that the characters were going to cross over, but when they do, especially in the crossover where Jake and Leon's paths intertwine and then Chris and Jake cross over, I've just realized actually, whilst reading this script, that that is the problem. There was so little effort going into Jake's campaign that they had to reuse half of a chapter from previous characters in order to fill it out. Yeah, that sucks. Okay. But anyway, they literally reuse huge chunks of the game, forcing you to spend 20 to 30 minutes, if not longer, going through and replaying stuff that you've already done. It's not even a case of you go into this and look at it from a different perspective. No, these are just boss fights in which you just do your thing. Also have to bring up at this point the useless moment here where Leon and Shelly get thrown over. I think it's Sherry? Is it Sherry? Probably Sherry. I don't even care anymore. Sherry. Where Leon and Sherry go over a fence to go and escape this area after you think the Ustanak is taken care of. And then they hear the Ustanak and then they just need to go back. So they could have just gone over the fence the same way that they got over the first time. However, they decided not to do this and decided that they were going to basically boost a bus to bash through the fence. Just silly, silly design choices that do not make sense to me, and it really hurt the flow of the game to me. Not to mention the biggest pet peeve that I have for this game that I was talking about before. Well, remember how I went through the entirety of the tutorial for the game, and I mentioned I would come back to this being the most annoying part? Yeah, here it is. They literally reuse the entire tutorial section in Chapter 5 of Leon's story. I am not kidding. The only differences are that Helena is standing up, not injured, and the door you opened for the green herb is already open and you can grab the green herb out of it. But the rest is literally the same, from the city street to the alleyway. This was so annoying to me and felt so incredibly lazy. Why they would give this as a tutorial just to shoehorn it into the game just felt weird. I do not understand why they would bother doing this. Like, what was the purpose here? Was the purpose that you were supposed to not play as Leon after the tutorial, so that you could maybe forget that that was the tutorial that you played through? Or did they expect it to be far enough away that you wouldn't remember, and it didn't feel as though it was the same thing? Because it is exactly the same thing. And if you play through Leon's campaign, you've only played for 4 hours before you get to that point. Anybody that has any form of memory is going to remember that, and it's going to feel wrong. This was poorly executed, and I hated every second of replaying this. Also, another thing, in every single campaign, there is a recurring part of a mission where you search for 3 keys while being chased by an unkillable thing. I was gonna say zombie, but it's not even really a zombie. It's just a bug that makes itself complete. It's incredibly frustrating. These sections are repetitive and annoying, and I hate them. You can stun the creature for solid periods of time, but they are just bullet sponges. You can put hundreds of rounds into these things before you actually stun it. The best way is using explosives, but explosives are few and far between. You don't find that many of them. Now, for my last point here, Jake's story. As a whole, Jake's story felt genuinely like a joke, and that the writers did not care. I have often said that using time travel or the kids of someone previously established in a franchise is usually the worst decision a writer can make. And I digress a little, but Harry Potter and the Cursed Child used both of these things, and I still do not forgive it. Why is the trolley lady a demon? What were you thinking? Anyway, the idea of using Albert Wesker's kid was an interesting idea, but it never really amounts to anything other than he has the antibodies for the current virus, which was fine, I guess. But then you've got this mission in the snow. Getting around this area is an absolute travesty. They have these zombies on jet skis, on like these ice skis, where you can use these to get around. They're not a fun time. They are so incredibly clunky to use. And then at the end of this chapter, you've got to do a full-on chase, which I cannot tell you how many times I died in this, just because the controls were that janky. Hated every second of it, and it felt like, hey, let's put this action sequence in here so that we don't have to care about story. That's all it was there for, I'm sure. But the biggest travesty, and I do not understand this by any stretch of the imagination, the entirety of the campaign, the Ustanak is following Jake. He has been chasing from start to finish, surviving more bullets than literally anything else in the game, and explosions like you would not believe. And the way you beat him is with a few punches. Seriously, the game has this cutscene in which you lose your pistol, which, don't worry about any of the other weapons you've picked up in the game, but it literally has a sequence in which you need to punch it. Even reading this back just annoys me, I'm not gonna lie. It's so frustrating. Like, sure, there is a sequence after in which firearms are involved, but this is the thing that hurts it the most, is punching him into the lava. I don't understand how or why at this particular point in the game, all of a sudden, you go, or Jake goes more rather, yeah, I can take him with my fists. Okay, now, those aside, I want to take some time here to talk about the achievements of the game. So, pretty early on in the playthrough, I noticed that I was getting a fair number of achievements for doing practically nothing. It felt like the game was giving me lollies or candy to keep me playing, honestly, but full on you, Resident Evil 6, for I cannot be bored. Despite the fact that I absolutely finished the game. In fact, there is an achievement for completing each chapter of the game. Every time you finish a chapter, a new achievement pops up. So I wanted to do a little bit of digging, and the first thing I took note of was a little bit of a concern, as the most collected achievement, The Longest Night, which you get for finishing the tutorial, which the game forces you to play, is at an 87% collection rate. which means that 13% of people maybe didn't start up their game, which, for the age it is, might be understandable. It may have been bundled with other games in like a humble bundle or something like that, and it was given to people that never wanted to play it at all, so they never have, right? The second most collected achievement, named One is Better Than None, is given to you for purchasing your first skill. This has a 64% collection rate. Granted, you have to go through any of the chapters from any of the characters before you can purchase a skill, as you won't have points to do so otherwise, but this is a big drop in number. Especially seeing as at the end of a chapter, this is where you first see the skills page, and you can purchase a skill here. So this got me thinking, what about the campaign completion? We have 4 campaigns, each with 5 chapters, so let's have a look. I'm going to give you the achievement names and their percentages in order from most to least achieved for the completion of Chapter 5 in each of the campaigns. Now, the first one, The Trouble with Women, which is granted for completing Chapter 5 in Leon's campaign, has 42%. Keeping in mind that these need to be on any difficulty to count. It doesn't matter what difficulty it is. 42% of people completed that campaign on Steam. Duty Calls, which is to complete Chapter 5 in Chris's campaign, is at 28%, a 14% drop from Leon's. See You Around, which is to complete Chapter 5 in Jake's campaign, is at 27%, only 1% less than Chris's. And then you have Ada's campaign, which is What's Next, completed at 21%. Now, keeping in mind that you can do these campaigns in any order, so by completing, say, Ada's campaign does not translate to quote-unquote completion of the campaign. Do you want to know how many people have actually completed the game? The current percentage for people completing the entirety of the campaign on amateur is 17.1%. In order to complete it on normal, which is what I did, 12.7% of people have that. That means if you were to get this game and complete it on normal, which is the ideal experience, you are in the top 15% of Steam players worldwide. This is not a hard achievement to get by any means, and it puts you into that bracket. So, after experiencing all 4 campaigns, was Resident Evil 6 really that bad? Well, Resident Evil 6 is undeniably ambitious. It offers a massive interconnected story with wildly different gameplay styles. For the most part, it's fun. I can't say that I overall had a bad time playing it, except for a few moments that I got unreasonably mad at. It is over the top, for sure, but as a Resident Evil game, it's chaotic, unfocused, and often struggles to find a consistent identity. If this game was released as its own IP, not using any of the Resident Evil characters, sure, realistically, people probably wouldn't have bought it because it didn't have the big name attached to it, but it would be a far more forgivable experience than plastering Resident Evil on it. Truthfully, I think this game would have gone better not being a Resident Evil game, which is really sad to say. But one thing that I want to bring up, and this is food for thought, something really wonderful did come from this game, and that's those multiplayer mechanics. Now, I won't lie, Resident Evil or Capcom never really capitalized on them. However, a wonderful, relatively small team that call themselves Hazelight Studios did. Truthfully, the reason that I was hyped to review Resident Evil 6 is because, honestly, as far as I'm aware, many of the mechanics used in games like It Takes Two and Split Fiction seem to have come mostly from Resident Evil 6. The concept of splitting up the two players to aid one another, whether it be puzzles or opening a door for them in such a way, as mundane as these tasks do seem in Resident Evil 6, seemingly were the keys to making It Takes Two and Split Fiction work as well as they do. They took the basics of that co-op mentality and turned it up to 11. I truly believe that we have this game to thank for giving Hazelight the basics to run with. And boy, did they run with them. Actually, no, I take that back. They didn't run with them. They flew with them. Split Fiction has genuinely got to be one of the greatest multiplayer puzzle games I have had the pleasure to play. And honestly, without Resident Evil 6, sure, it may have been possible, but where would we have been without it? I don't know. But that's just my take. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, like and subscribe. Because much like Resident Evil 6, this channel also refuses to slow the fuck down. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please feel free to head on over to Griever Productions, another channel of mine, in which I review mostly music. Hope to see you there. Bye for now.